The wind came first, dry, bitter, rolling across the plains like a warning no one could hear. In the back of the open-bed truck sat half a dozen German prisoners, their wrists cuffed loosely, their eyes fixed on the endless nothing stretching between scrubland and sky. Among them was Anna Keller, 23 years old, a secretary from Hamburg who had never seen a desert until now. Dust gathered in her hair and mouth as she tried to breathe through the heat. The world shimmered, fences, telephone poles, mirages. Everything seemed half real, half ghost. Somewhere behind them, the war still burned across oceans. Ahead of them, the sun promised another kind of punishment. The soldiers driving the convoy didn't speak much. They were young, farm boys and mechanics in worn khaki, with rifles slung casually across their knees. They didn't look cruel, just tired. One of them turned his head once, caught Anna's gaze for half a second, then looked away. Embarrassed by the humanity of it, the truck rattled on. When the convoy finally stopped, it wasn't in front of barbed wire or guard towers, but a cluster of ranch buildings, sun-bleached barns, a windmill spinning lazily, a horse snorting near a fence. The sign on the gate read, "Thornwood Ranch." Anna blinked, confused. This wasn't a camp. It looked like freedom pretending to be work. A sergeant barked orders. The prisoners climbed down. The ground burned through their shoes. She stumbled, steadied herself, and caught the faint scent of hay, leather and something else, on cattle, perhaps. A tall man approached from the barn, his hat pulled low, sleeves rolled up, eyes squinting against the light. His name was Jack Thornton, though she didn't know that yet. To her, he was just another American face, unreadable, rough-edged, impossible to place in her understanding of enemy or savior. He spoke to the sergeant in a slow Texas drawl. Anna caught only fragments. Help for the harvest. Can work the pens. Not dangerous. Then his gaze shifted toward her, not in command, not in pity, but in simple observation. She met it and felt, for reasons she didn't understand, suddenly seen. By evening, she and the other POWs were given cots in an old bunkhouse that smelled of wood smoke and soap. The soldiers left at dusk, leaving behind a civilian foreman, a cook, and the rancher who'd volunteered to house low-risk prisoners. The first night was sleepless. Coyotes cried in the distance. Somewhere a radio crackled with country music, a voice singing about home, whiskey, and waiting. Anna lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what home meant now. Days began to blend. Early mornings, aching muscles, calloused hands. She learned how to mend fences, sort feed, clean stalls. She learned the language of motion, the meaning of silence. The Americans kept their distance, but the lines softened over time. A nod became a word. A word became a shared laugh over spilled grain. And then there was him. Jack Thornton moved with the kind of quiet confidence that made everyone step aside. He spoke little, but when he did, his words landed like slow thunder. He never treated her like a prisoner, only like a worker who had to learn the rhythm of the ranch. She hated that it unnerved her. She hated more that it comforted her. One afternoon, he handed her a glass bottle of water, real cold water from the well. The moment was nothing. It was everything. "Don't let the heat get you," he said simply. She nodded, unable to answer, her German tongue heavy with gratitude she couldn't express. That night, the air smelled of rain for the first time in weeks. She stood outside the bunkhouse looking toward the ranch lights flickering under the clouds. And for the first time since capture, she didn't feel entirely lost. The storm came suddenly, rain hammering on tin roofs, lightning cracking open the horizon. And under that storm, somewhere between thunder and silence, something began to shift, not between enemies, not between captor and captive, but between two people who had every reason to fear each other and yet didn't. By the time morning came, the land had changed color, so had everything else. The morning after the storm felt strange, too still, too quiet, as if the land itself was listening. The sky had washed itself clean, a soft blue stretched across miles of prairie. Puddles shimmered between the wooden fences. The air smelled of wet earth, hay, and something faintly sweet. The first peace she'd felt in months. Anna stepped outside the bunkhouse, her boots sinking into the mud. The American flag on the gate flapped weakly in the breeze. Somewhere a horse snorted. She wasn't sure what was expected of her yet. No one had told her what to do, just to follow orders, though orders here didn't feel like the kind shouted in camps. The cook, A wide woman named Martha stood by a wash basin scrubbing tin plates. She looked up once, expression unreadable. "Breakfast's at 6. You eat, you work," Martha said simply. Anna nodded, English still tangled in her head. The woman handed her a biscuit, warm and dry, and pointed toward the pens. The morning passed in work, hauling feed, gathering hay, mending fences with blistered hands. The tasks were simple, almost rhythmic. She worked beside two other German women, Ilse and Margot, both from Bremen, both trying to forget the sound of falling bombs. None of them spoke much. Words carried risk, even when no one was listening. From the corner of her eye, Anna noticed Jack Thornton near the stables, checking saddles, brushing a horse that looked old enough to remember the Depression. He moved slowly, patiently, his hands sure and unhurried. Every motion had purpose, as if he understood the language of the land better than that of people. When their eyes met briefly across the yard, it was only for a heartbeat, but long enough for her to feel something shift again, quiet as dust. Later, under the noon sun, he approached. His hat shadowed his face. "You handle rope?" he asked. Anna shook her head. "No, sir." He nodded toward the corral. "You'll learn. Horses don't care who's fighting who. They only care how you hold the line." He showed her the grip, the knot, the motion. The rope slid against her palm, rough and biting. He corrected her posture gently, guiding her wrist, his touch brief but grounding. "Good," he said softly, stepping back. No one else noticed, but Anna did. The way he said it, not as a command, but as acknowledgement. By evening, her hands were raw and aching. She soaked them in cool water outside the bunkhouse. The desert turned gold as the sun sank low. In the distance, the cattle groaned and the smell of stew drifted from the cookhouse. Margot sat beside her, rubbing her shoulders. "You think they'll send us to the real camp soon?" she whispered. Anna didn't answer. She wasn't sure she wanted to leave anymore. That night, as the others slept, she looked out the window. The ranch light shimmered across the open field, a fragile constellation in the dark. She could see Jack near the barn, lantern in hand, checking the stalls before bed. Something about his steadiness unnerved her. Not because it was harsh, but because it was kind. The next morning, work began before dawn again. Jack gave them new tasks, feeding horses, clearing troughs, stacking hay. He didn't speak much, only offered short instructions, but never with cruelty. Once she dropped a pail. It clattered loudly, echoing across the yard. She froze, bracing for the yell, for punishment, for the kind of reaction she'd grown used to from men with power. But Jack only bent down, picked it up, and handed it back. "Happens," he said simply and walked away. The simplicity of it undid her. Days turned into a pattern. The same dawns, the same sunsets, the same quiet understanding that something unusual was happening here. The fences kept them in, yes, but not like in Germany. Here, the world itself felt wide open. One afternoon, Martha called her into the kitchen. "Need an extra hand for supper," she said. Anna helped slice bread and set the table. Martha watched her quietly, then said, "You're cleaner than most of the men around here." Anna smiled faintly. "In Hamburg, I was secretary." "Not anymore, honey," Martha said, passing her a bowl of beans. "Now you're a survivor." That word, survivor, stayed with her the whole night. Later, as she carried a bucket of water back to the bunkhouse, she saw Jack near the fence again, feeding the horses. He nodded in her direction. "Evening, Miss Keller." She hesitated before replying. "Good. Evening, Mr. Thornton." Her accent turned his name into music. The silence after felt full, not empty, the kind that carries meaning without words. The stars came out slowly, stretching across the dark sky like scattered salt. The desert wind brushed against her face, soft and cool. For the first time since her capture, Anna Keller felt something dangerous. Not fear, not anger, but the faint, aching beginning of belonging. Spring came late that year. The rains left behind green patches across the ranch, wildflowers pushing through the dry soil as if testing whether peace had truly come. The work didn't stop, but it changed. Fewer guards, lighter tone. The prisoners were trusted to move between barns without escort now. Anna had learned enough English to follow commands, to ask for tools, even to trade small jokes with the ranch hands. Sometimes, in rare bursts of courage, she'd try new words, watching Jack's face for approval. He never laughed at her mistakes. One morning, While fixing a fence post, she asked, "You always live here?" He nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Born here. Probably die here too," she frowned. "You want that?" He paused. "It's not bad dying where you belong." She thought about that long after he walked away. Work brought them together more often than conversation did. She learned how to ride a horse, how to check feed, how to spot a snake before stepping. He taught her through gestures, through patience, through silence. The language of someone who didn't need many words. The others noticed. Ilse teased her once. "You look at him too long," she whispered one night. Anna didn't answer. The words burned in her chest because they were true. It wasn't the kind of attention she wanted. It wasn't even safe to want it. But something in Jack's presence, steady, unhurried, unarmed, pulled her toward him the way water finds the lowest ground. One afternoon, while the others rested, she found herself near the corral, watching him mend a saddle strap. The smell of leather and oil filled the air. He looked up, catching her stare, then smiled faintly. "You ever been on one?" he asked. She hesitated. "Horse?" "No." He nodded to the chestnut mare beside him. "Gentle one." "Try it." Her instinct screamed no. She wasn't supposed to ride. Not without permission, not without guards. But something in his voice, and calm, patient, overrode the fear. He steadied the reins as she mounted awkwardly. The horse shifted, uneasy. Jack's hand brushed her knee, guiding the animal with a quiet whoa. The contact lasted only a second, but it was enough to set her heartbeat racing faster than the wind. "You're fine," he said softly. She exhaled. The horse began to move, slow, steady, circling the pen. Her posture was tense, her jaw tight. But then, as she found the rhythm, a laugh escaped her, pure, unguarded, unfamiliar. Jack smiled. "There it is," he said. When she finally climbed down, her face flushed, hair loose from its braid. She handed him the reins and said, "Danke." He grinned. "You're welcome, Miss Keller." Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition neither could name and both tried to ignore. That night she couldn't sleep. She listened to the sounds of the ranch, the steady chirp of crickets, the soft moan of wind through the wood slats, the occasional snort of a horse. Everything felt alive in a way it hadn't for months. She thought of his hands, rough, patient, kind. She thought of his voice when he said her name. And she hated herself for thinking of them at all. The next morning, Martha handed her a basket of clothes. "Take these to the creek, will you? Thornton's got a wash line there." Anna nodded. The sun was high by the time she reached the creek, a small trickle cutting through the land, lined with stones and wild grass. She knelt and began to scrub, sleeves rolled up, water cool on her skin. She didn't hear him approach until his shadow crossed the ground beside her. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Jack said quietly. She looked up, startled. "No one else come." He crouched beside her, picking up one of the wet shirts. "You'll ruin your hands." "They are already ruined," she said simply. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, she didn't see the guarded distance in his eyes. He saw her not as a prisoner, not as a German, but as a woman who had survived too much. He dipped the shirt in water, wrung it out, and placed it gently on the line. For a moment their hands brushed again. Neither moved. The wind rustled through the cotton and time seemed to slow. Not a grand moment, not a confession, just a quiet pause in a world that had stopped being kind. Then he stood. "Don't stay too long." "Rattlers come out before dusk," she nodded, heart pounding. "Yes, Mr. Thornton." He tipped his hat. "Jack," he said softly. "You can call me Jack." That night she wrote his name in the corner of her ration notebook. Once, then again as if tracing something forbidden. Outside, the coyotes sang to the moon, and for the first time, she didn't think of Germany or fences or guards. She thought of Texas, dry, endless, and suddenly full of dangerous warmth. Summer burned the land into gold and dust. By June, the air itself felt heavy enough to break. Days bled into one another's work, heat, sweat, silence. The war across the ocean might as well have been another lifetime. Anna's English had grown better, enough that Jack sometimes forgot she was learning. They spoke more now about rain, crops, music. She liked his voice, slow and warm, the kind that made even the harshest words sound like comfort. He'd ask about Germany. She'd ask about cattle. It was a strange trade of worlds, his simple, hers shattered. One night, while repairing tools in the barn, he asked, "You ever go dancing back home?" She smiled faintly. Once, long time ago. Before bombs. He leaned against the wall, wiping his hands. "Well, that's a damn shame." She laughed, a soft, fragile sound that startled them both. Days later, the heat broke with another storm, thunder that rolled like distant guns. Work stopped early. The women returned to the bunkhouse. The men stayed to tie down equipment. Anna stood at the doorway watching the rain. Lightning flashed, illuminating Jack across the yard, hauling feed sacks inside the barn. Without thinking, she ran to help him. "You shouldn't be out here," he shouted over the wind. "Neither should you," she shouted back. Together, they dragged the last of the sacks inside. The thunder shook the roof. Water poured through the cracks. They stood, drenched, breathing hard. The sound of rain filling everything. Jack looked at her, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide. Laughter still caught in her throat. Something inside him broke. He took one step closer, then another, until the air between them was gone. His hand lifted, hesitant, trembling, and brushed the wet strands from her cheek. She didn't pull away. The storm outside raged louder than her heartbeat, but she barely heard it. When his lips met hers, it wasn't passion. It was surrender. Two people starved of warmth, finding it in the only forbidden place left. The kiss was brief, desperate, and silent. When it ended, they just stood there, breathing each other's air. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She shook her head. "Don't be." For a long moment, neither moved. Then the barn door creaked under the wind, breaking the spell. They stepped apart, the weight of what had happened settling like dust. "Someone will see," she said quietly. "No one will," he answered. But even he didn't sound sure. After that night, the world became smaller. Every glance meant something. Every word carried hidden weight. They spoke less in public, but when no one watched, their hands brushed too long. Their eyes lingered too often. At dusk, she would sometimes walk near the fence, pretending to collect stray tools just to see him leading the horses in. A nod became their language, the kind of silent acknowledgement born from shared guilt and unspoken need. One evening, he brought her a small paper bag. Inside was an apple, the first she'd tasted in months. She looked up at him, uncertain. "For you," he said simply. She took it, her hand trembling. "You could be punished. So could you," he replied. Then he smiled. "Guess we'll have to share the risk." She laughed softly, and they split the apple right there. Half for her, half for him. It tasted like freedom, or something dangerously close to it. But the ranch was not as empty as they believed. A guard named Corporal Dean had started to notice the small things. The glances, the timing, the way Jack always volunteered for work near the POW quarters. He said nothing yet. But he watched. And in wartime, watching was all it took to destroy a life. One night in August, under a sliver of moonlight, Anna slipped from the bunkhouse and crossed the yard barefoot. The ground was cool, the air still heavy from heat. Jack was waiting in the barn, as if he'd known she would come. Neither spoke. They met in silence, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. The world outside the wooden walls ceased to exist. The storm, the war, the fences, all dissolved until there was nothing left but breath and heartbeat. Later, when dawn crept through the cracks, they sat together, watching light crawl across the floorboards. "What happens now?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. "Now," he said finally, "we live with what we've done." She looked down. "And if they find out?" He exhaled slowly. "Then I'll take the blame." But they both knew the truth. In war, no one is innocent and no one is spared. Outside, the roosters began to crow. Another day waited. But for them, everything had already changed. By September, the wind changed. The days stayed hot, but the nights cooled, and with them came a silence that felt heavier than before. Anna's body changed first. Small things at first, fatigue, nausea, the way her dresses fit tighter around her stomach. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself many lies, but one morning, while hanging laundry, she bent too quickly and felt dizzy. Martha caught her just in time. "Easy now," the cook said, steadying her. "You're pale as paper." "I'm fine," Anna muttered, forcing a smile. Martha frowned but said nothing. Still, her eyes lingered longer than before. That night Anna sat alone on her cot, hands trembling against her belly. There was no denying it anymore. Beneath her heartbeat there was another. She whispered the word into the dark. Child. And it terrified her. She tried to avoid Jack at first. Days passed with only stolen glances across the yard. But silence didn't hide fear. It only magnified it. Finally, one evening after dusk, he found her near the stables gathering water. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly. She froze, then nodded. "Yes." He stepped closer, careful as if approaching a frightened horse. "Why?" She looked up, eyes shining with tears she'd tried to swallow. "Because everything has changed." He frowned, confused, until she guided his hand toward her stomach. For a moment, the world stopped. Jack stared, eyes widening as realization hit. He pulled his hand back as if burned, then whispered, "God help us." The weeks that followed felt like walking through fog. Jack did everything he could to protect her, shifting her work to the kitchen, keeping guards distracted, pretending nothing had changed. But secrets don't stay buried on open land, Martha noticed first. Then the other women whispered. "She's with child," Ilsa murmured. "But whose?" The question hung in the air like smoke. One morning, Corporal Dean stopped Anna near the corral. His smile was thin. "You're looking well fed these days," he said. She kept her eyes down. "Yes, sir." He leaned closer. "Careful, Keller. The War Department doesn't take kindly to fraternization, not with the enemy." The word enemy cut sharper than any blade. Jack confronted him that night behind the barn. "You talk to her again like that and You'll what?" Dean snapped. "You think your ranch makes you untouchable? You're harboring a Nazi prisoner. You're breaking federal law." Jack stepped closer, voice low. "She's not a Nazi, she's a woman. A human being." "You remember those?" Dean smirked. "You better hope Washington doesn't come asking questions." And with that, the threat became real. By November, the War Department did come asking. 2 jeeps rolled in one afternoon, officers in pressed uniforms, clipboards in hand, expressions sharp and empty. They spoke to the foreman, then to Jack. "Rumors," one said. "We need to confirm them." Jack stood straight, jaw clenched. "There's nothing to confirm." "Then you won't mind if we ask the prisoners a few questions." He didn't answer. Inside the bunkhouse, the women stood like statues. The officers walked slowly, eyes scanning faces, notebooks ready. When one stopped in front of Anna, her pulse thundered. "Name?" "Anna Keller." "You've been here how long?" 6 months. "Any contact with civilian men beyond assigned work?" She shook her head. "No, sir." The officer's gaze lingered on her rounded belly. "You sure about that?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. Jack stepped forward. "That's enough," the officer turned. "You're out of line, civilian." Jack's hands balled into fists. "You're out of humanity." For a second, no one breathed. Then the officer gave a cold smile. "We'll be in touch." They left, but the damage stayed. That night, Jack found her crying behind the bunkhouse. "They'll take me away," she whispered. "Maybe the baby too." He knelt beside her, hands trembling. "I won't let that happen." "You can't stop them," she said, her voice breaking. "You can't fight the government." He looked at her and really looked and then said, "Then I'll fight the whole damn country if I have to." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe love could outlive rules and war and shame, but she'd seen too much of the world to trust happy endings. The stars above them shimmered cold and distant. Somewhere a coyote howled, a lonely sound, too much like grief. In that moment, Anna realized something she couldn't say aloud. Love in wartime isn't freedom. It's just another kind of captivity. The letters came 2 weeks later, stamped with an eagle and signed in black ink. They arrived in a single envelope marked "Confidential," Office of the Provost Marshal General. Inside were orders. Anna Keller was to be transferred immediately to a federal internment, facility pending investigation, into breach of conduct and moral code violations, involving civilian personnel. Jack read the letter 3 times before the words began to mean anything. Each line hit like a blow. He stormed into the foreman's office, slamming the paper onto the desk. "They're treating her like a criminal." The foreman sighed, not meeting his eyes. "She's a prisoner, Jack. You crossed the line." "She's a woman carrying my child," Jack said. "And I'll be damned if I let them treat her like cargo." The foreman shook his head slowly. Orders come from Washington. Nothing you or I can do. But Jack had never been good at doing nothing. That night, he found Anna sitting by the window in the bunkhouse, her hands folded over her stomach. "They're taking you," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "I know." He stepped closer, his voice trembling. "I'll go with you." "You can't," she said. "They'll arrest you." "Let them," he whispered. She shook her head. "You don't understand. They'll take the baby too." Silence filled the room. Outside, the cicadas screamed in the night, loud, relentless, like a warning the world refused to hear. Jack knelt in front of her, tears burning behind his eyes. "I'll find you. Wherever they send you, I'll come." She smiled weakly. "No, you can't follow me into this." Her voice was soft but steady, the voice of someone who'd already lost too much to believe in promises. By dawn, the military trucks arrived. 2 MPs stepped out. Young men, their faces blank with duty. They called her name and the bunkhouse fell silent. Anna stood gathering the small bundle of things she owned. A comb, a photograph, a handkerchief. Jack tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. When she passed him, she reached for his hand just once. Quickly, their fingers brushing like the memory of a touch. Then she was gone. The trucks rolled away, dust rising in their wake, swallowing her silhouette as if the desert itself had decided to erase her. Rumors spread faster than the wind. Within days, whispers ran through town. The German girl, the cowboy, the baby. Some called it scandal, others called it sin. The papers got hold of the story. Texas ranch worker accused of relations with enemy prisoner. The headline hit harder than any bullet. The ranch was swarmed by officials and reporters. They asked questions he didn't answer. They photographed him feeding the horses, the same hands they claimed had disgraced the uniform he never wore. At night, he sat on the porch, cigarette glowing in the dark, her absence echoing louder than the crickets. In Washington, the War Department filed reports, debates, memorandums, moral integrity, national image, disciplinary action. But behind all the paperwork was a single human story that none of them cared to read. Jack wrote letters anyway. He wrote to the camp in Oklahoma, to the one in Kansas, even to Fort Oglethorpe in Georgia. Most came back stamped undeliverable. Weeks passed, then months. No answer. Until one evening in December, a letter arrived in handwriting that wasn't hers. Tight, formal, typed. "Miss Keller has been transferred to Camp Shanks, New York, awaiting repatriation. Medical condition stable," that was all. No signature. No return address. He read it until the paper wore thin. Days later, he rode into town, marched straight to the postmaster, and demanded to know if outgoing correspondence to foreign internees could be sent through military mail. The man looked nervous. "You can try, son, but I can't promise you'll ever see it." Jack nodded, took a blank sheet, and began to write anyway. "Anna, if you're reading this, it means the world hasn't buried us yet. I don't know where they've taken you, but I'll wait. The ranch is still here. The sky still looks the same. The baby's got a place when it's ready, so do you." Jack, he folded the letter, sealed it, and dropped it in the slot. The sound of it falling into darkness felt final, like a prayer cast into a well. Christmas came with frost. He rode the pastures alone now. The horses felt restless. The fields emptier. Martha left food at his door, but he barely ate. Every night he lit the same lantern by the window, the one Anna used to see from the bunkhouse. He left it burning until dawn. The War Department had closed their file. The scandal had died down, but for Jack Thornton the war had just begun. Snow fell across New York in gray silence the morning Anna went into labor. The barracks at Camp Shanks were nothing like the ranch. No open skies, no wind through the grass, no scent of horses or hay. Just cold iron bunks and the smell of disinfectant. The guards kept their distance. The nurses did not. "Breathe," one whispered, holding her hand as pain ripped through her body. "That's it, sweetheart, again?" Anna cried out, the sound swallowed by the storm outside. Her mind blurred between the present and memory. The barn, the rain, Jack's voice saying, "You'll be fine." Hours passed. Then just as dawn broke, a single cry split the stillness. A baby girl. Tiny, red-faced, alive. Anna reached for her and trembling, terrified. And when the nurse placed the child in her arms, everything else fell away. The fences, the war, the distance, gone. There was only warmth, heartbeat against heartbeat. She whispered in German, "Meine Tochter, my daughter." The nurse smiled faintly. "You should name her." Anna looked out the small frost-covered window and said softly, "Grace." Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Texas lay under a winter sun. Jack rode for hours each day, searching for news, for answers, for anything. The letter from the War Department had confirmed her transfer, but not her fate. He'd written a dozen more times. No reply. Every time a mail truck came down the road, his chest tightened. Every time it passed without stopping, the ache deepened. Martha watched him from the porch one evening. "You can't keep living like this, Jack." He stared at the horizon. "I don't know how to stop," she sighed. "Maybe she'll come back." He shook his head. "They won't let her. Not now." But still he waited. At Camp Shanks, Anna's world had shrunk to a crib and a cot. The baby's cries were her only comfort, her only proof that something pure had survived. Some guards were cruel. Others pretended not to see. The nurse who had helped deliver the child, Lieutenant Parker, visited often, bringing milk and blankets from the medical ward. One night, Parker said quietly, "They'll send you home soon." Anna looked up sharply. "Home? Germany," Parker said, eyes soft with pity. "Repatriation ships leave next month." Anna's arms tightened around Grace. "They won't let me take her." The nurse hesitated, then whispered, "You'll have to fight for that." Jack received the telegram in February. Prisoner Keller scheduled for repatriation. Camp Shanks. Infant to remain stateside pending adoption. He read it twice, then again, until his hands began to shake. Adoption. They were taking his child by sunset. He was already on the road, his old truck rattling through frozen towns and long highways. He drove through the night, snow pounding the windshield. The same storm that had carried her voice in his dreams for months. He reached the camp 2 days later, coat soaked, eyes hollow. Guards at the gate turned him away at first, but desperation has its own language. "I'm the father," he said. "I just want to see them." The officer at the desk didn't even look up. "That's not possible, sir. She's a prisoner." "You're a civilian." Jack slammed his fist on the counter, "Then lock me up too." The room went silent. Finally, an older officer stepped forward. "You've got 5 minutes." They met in a small office behind the infirmary. When Anna saw him, she froze, disbelief turning to a cry that caught in her throat. "Jack," she whispered. He crossed the room in 2 strides, wrapping her in his arms. The smell of her hair, the feel of her shaking. It was all too real, too fragile. Then he saw the baby in her arms. Tiny. Perfect. Sleeping. He reached out, barely daring to touch her cheek. "She's beautiful," he said softly. Anna nodded, tears streaming silently. "They want to take her." He looked at her, then at the child. "Over my dead body." But 5 minutes isn't long enough to rewrite history. The officer cleared his throat. "Time." Jack turned to him. "Please, let me stay." The man's voice was low but firm. "This isn't my decision." Jack looked back at Anna, memorizing everything. Her eyes, her trembling hands, the curve of the baby's face. "I'll find you," he said. She shook her head. "Don't promise what you can't keep." "I already did," he whispered. Then she was gone, escorted back through the gates. Baby in her arms, snow swirling between them like ghosts. The next morning, he watched the repatriation convoy roll out, trucks full of prisoners bound for the harbor, for ships headed to a country still smoldering from war. He stood in the snow until the last vehicle disappeared. Then he fell to his knees, the cold biting through his jeans, his breath coming in broken gasps. Somewhere beyond the Atlantic, Anna was going home, but home no longer existed. The ship docked at Bremerhaven under a gray, empty sky. Anna stood among hundreds of returning prisoners, men and women draped in coats too thin for the cold, faces hollow from waiting. The air smelled of coal, sea, and ruin. She stepped onto German soil for the first time in years and felt nothing. No joy, no relief. Just the realization that there was no home left to come back to. The harbor was lined with wreckage. Ships split in half, cranes twisted like skeletons. The city beyond was worse. Hamburg had been burned down to its bones. The streets where she once walked as a girl were gone, replaced by rubble and ghosts. She found a shelter run by the Red Cross, a single room with a cot and a cracked window. They gave her a piece of bread, a cup of weak soup, and a form to fill out. Next of kin? The woman behind the desk asked. Anna hesitated. None. The word tasted bitter. Weeks passed. Winter melted into a muddy spring. People rebuilt what they could. Markets opened in the ruins. Black smoke drifted from chimneys again. But Anna could not rebuild. Not yet. Each morning she walked to the docks and watched ships leave for America. Ships carrying food, supplies, soldiers returning home. Each one reminded her of what she'd lost. At night, she dreamed of Texas, the sound of horses, the smell of rain on dust, the warmth of his voice, and the child's face, small and perfect, fading before she could reach her. Sometimes she woke with her hands curled around nothing, whispering the name Grace. One day she found her way to a Red Cross office handling war separations. Inside, people begged for lists, letters, any proof that someone they loved was still alive. When it was her turn, she handed the clerk a paper. American camp. 1946, infant born in custody. The clerk adjusted his glasses, scanning the files. After a long moment, he shook his head. No record of the child in our archives. You'll have to contact the U.S. authorities directly. She stared at him. And how do I do that? He sighed. You write, and you hope. So she wrote. Her first letter went to the War Department, then another to the American Red Cross, then one to a hospital in New York she had heard of from a nurse at Camp Shanks. Each letter carried the same plea. My name is Anna Keller. I was a German internee. My child, a girl, was taken by American custody. I wish only to know if she is alive. Weeks passed. Months. No reply. Until one day, in the summer of 1947, an envelope arrived. Thin, worn, with an American postmark. She tore it open with shaking hands. Miss Keller, your inquiry has been received. Due to confidentiality laws, details regarding minors placed under U.S. care cannot be disclosed. The child in question has been adopted into a private family and is reported to be in good health. We regret we cannot provide further information, that was all. No name, no location, no hope. That night she walked to the river where the ruins reflected faint starlight. She held the letter over the water, her hands trembling, then pulled it back against her chest. No, she whispered. You stay with me. She folded it carefully and placed it inside her coat, close to her heart where it would stay for the rest of her life. In time, she found work at a hospital in Bremen. Cleaning floors at first, then assisting nurses. The smell of antiseptic brought back too many memories, and of pain, of birth, of the small miracle she'd once held and lost. But work gave her something to stand on. Years passed in quiet motion, scrubbing, mending, surviving. The world around her changed. Nations rebuilt. People forgot, but she did not. Every year on Grace's birthday, she would buy a single white flower from the market, a daisy or a lily, whatever she could afford, and place it by her window. Happy birthday, my little one, she would whisper, and for a moment, she could almost hear a baby's laughter carried on the wind. In 1954, she received another letter. This one postmarked from Texas. The handwriting stopped her breath. Anna, if this finds you, know that I never stopped searching. They said you were gone. They said you never made it back. But I kept writing anyway. Grace would be 8 now. She's in America somewhere. I hope she knows she was loved, twice over. If you ever want to find me, the ranch is still here. So am I. Jack Thornton, tears fell onto the page, blurring his name. She pressed the paper to her lips and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, somewhere beyond the ocean, the story wasn't over yet. By 1960, the war had become a story in history books. Children in the streets of Bremen played among buildings that once lay in ruins. The air smelled of coal smoke and bread again. Germany was rebuilding, learning how to smile without guilt. Anna worked at the same hospital still, now older, quieter, her hair streaked with silver. Her co-workers called her Frau Keller with respect. No one asked about her past. At night she would still write letters, fewer now, smaller, more cautious. Most came back unanswered, until one afternoon in early spring, A nurse handed her a stack of mail from the front desk. Among them was an envelope marked Texas, USA. Her breath caught. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the return address, Thornwood Ranch, froze her where she stood. She carried it home and sat by the window before opening it. Inside was a short note. Frau Keller, my name is Elizabeth Carter. I'm writing on behalf of Mr. Jack Thornton. He passed away last winter. Among his belongings was a letter addressed to you and a photograph he wished to send if ever found. Please know that he spoke of you often, and of a child. The envelope held a faded photograph. Her hands shook as she pulled it free. In it, a young girl, maybe 14, stood beside a horse, her hair light, her smile shy. Behind her, the ranch stretched wide and golden under the Texas sun. On the back, in Jack's handwriting, were 2 words, Our Grace. Anna pressed the photo to her heart and wept for the first time in decades. Weeks passed before she could bring herself to write back. Dear Mrs. Carter, please forgive this reply. I am the woman Jack once knew, the one who carried the child. I only wish to know, is she well? A month later, another letter arrived. Dear Frau Keller, Grace was raised by a kind family in Austin. She attended school, plays the piano beautifully, and volunteers at a hospital. She never married. I believe she still visits the ranch sometimes, says it feels like home. If you wish, I can send her your name. Elizabeth Carter. Anna sat for hours with the letter in her lap. To know that her child lived, that she was safe, that she'd grown up in sunlight and kindness, was both joy and ache. She stared out the window at the harbor, the same horizon that had once taken everything from her. Now it offered something back. Years slipped by. The 1970s came with new cities, new music, and people too young to remember the war. Anna retired from the hospital and moved to a small village near the sea. Her world had shrunk to a garden. A cat and a drawer full of letters tied with ribbon. Then, one morning, a knock came at the door. When she opened it, a woman stood there, maybe in her 30s, American, tall, wearing a blue dress and holding a suitcase. Frau Keller? The woman asked, her accent soft but uncertain. Anna nodded slowly. Yes, the woman smiled nervously. My name is Grace Thornton. For a moment, the world stopped. The sound of the sea vanished, the years collapsed, and all that remained was a trembling heartbeat. Anna reached out, touching her daughter's face and the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw, both familiar and foreign. My God, she whispered. You found me. Grace's eyes filled with tears. I had to. I needed to know. They stood there in silence for a long time, mother and daughter, strangers and mirrors, until Anna drew her into an embrace that erased 3 decades of distance. Later, they sat in the garden, the smell of salt and roses drifting through the air. Grace showed her photographs of the ranch, the family who raised her, the hospital where she worked. Anna listened, smiling through tears. You have his eyes, she said softly. Grace nodded. And your hands. The sun began to sink, casting gold across the flowers. Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. This was his, she said. He wrote it before he died. He said I should give it to you if I ever found you. Anna opened it with shaking fingers. Anna, if you're reading this, it means what we began didn't die with the war. It lived. In her, in the sky, and everything we lost and still found again. Some loves don't fade. They just wait to be remembered. Jack. Anna closed her eyes, the tears falling freely now. He waited, she whispered. Grace took her hand. So did you. The waves crashed softly against the shore, and for the first time since 1946, Anna Keller felt whole again. The days that followed moved like a dream neither of them wanted to end. Grace stayed in Anna's small seaside cottage for a week that felt like a lifetime compressed into a handful of mornings. They cooked together, walked the dunes, and talked, not about the war, but about everything that came after. Grace asked about Texas, about the ranch, about her father. Anna told her stories, not the tragic ones, but the ones with sunlight in them. She spoke of the long summer evenings when the air smelled of sage and the horses moved slow through the grass. Of the way Jack used to hum while fixing fences, his voice low and calm. She described how he taught her to ride, how he laughed when she fell and cried when she got up. Grace listened, tears in her eyes. He sounds like someone who never stopped loving you. Anna smiled softly. He didn't. He couldn't. At night, they sat by the window watching the waves crash against the rocks. Grace would play a tune on the small piano Anna had kept since her hospital days. Slow, hesitant, tender. When she finished, Anna said, "That melody. It sounds familiar." Grace smiled faintly. "I used to play it for the man who raised me. He said it came from a song someone once sang to him in Texas. Said it reminded him of a woman he could never forget." Anna turned toward the window, her hands trembling slightly. "He remembered." "Yes," Grace whispered. "He did." For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the ocean, vast, endless, forgiving. On the third day, Grace asked, "Why didn't you try to come back?" Anna looked at her hands, worn and thin. "Because by the time I could, the world had moved on. The paper said women like me were traitors. No one wanted to hear about love between enemies. So I stayed quiet. I thought it was the only way to keep you safe." Grace nodded slowly. "All my life I wondered who I was. Now I understand." Anna smiled through tears. "You were never a mistake, Grace. You were the only thing that ever made sense." Grace leaned forward and embraced her. Gentle, certain, as if afraid to let go. Each morning they walked to the market in the village. The locals greeted them politely, assuming Grace was Anna's niece or a visiting nurse. No one asked questions, and Anna was grateful for that. They bought fresh bread, fish, and fruit, and sometimes sat by the harbor to watch the ships leave. This time not in fear, but in peace. Grace said, "Maybe I'll stay longer next time." Anna squeezed her hand. "Next time?" Grace smiled. "You don't think you're rid of me after one visit, do you?" Anna laughed softly. It was a sound that hadn't existed in years, but time, as always, moves quietly and without mercy. One morning, Grace received a telegram from the States. Her adoptive mother had fallen ill. She needed to return. They stood at the train station under a pale gray sky, the sea wind biting cold against their faces. Anna held her daughter's hands tightly. "Promise me you'll write." "I will," Grace said. "And you'll come visit when you can?" Anna smiled faintly. "We'll see." When the train began to move, Grace leaned out the window and called, "I love you." "Mama!" It was the first time she had ever said it aloud. Anna raised her hand, unable to speak, tears glistening in her eyes. The train disappeared into the mist. She received the first letter 2 weeks later. Then another. Then more. Each one was filled with small, beautiful details. Flowers blooming in Texas. Children at the hospital where Grace worked. Stories of the ranch restored. Anna kept them all in a wooden box beside her bed. Every night she would read one before sleeping, whispering a prayer of thanks for the miracle the world had almost taken from her. Years passed gently. By the 1980s, Anna's hair had turned white, her hands frail. She spent her mornings tending to her small garden, the afternoons watching the tide roll in. One evening, a storm rolled across the coast. She sat by the window with her tea and a photograph of Grace, now a woman in her 50s, smiling beside a group of children from her clinic. Anna smiled back at the picture. "You did well, my darling." Lightning flashed over the sea. She closed her eyes, listening to the thunder fade into rain. She passed away quietly that night, peaceful, serene, as if finally allowing herself to rest. When Grace arrived weeks later, she found the letters still tied neatly with ribbon, and beneath them, the photograph that had once crossed an ocean. The one Jack had sent all those years ago. On the back, Anna had written a single line in careful script, "For the love that survived the war." Grace pressed the photo to her heart and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the wind carried the scent of salt and lilac, the same scent that had once filled a Texas barn at dusk. And somewhere, far beyond time, 3 souls, 1 man, 1 woman, 1 child, finally found peace in the memory they had built from love and loss. Epilogue. For the love that survived the war. The sea was calm that morning. Light moved slowly across the waves, pale and golden, as if the world itself were holding its breath. On the small bluff above the water, a woman stood, her hair pulled back, a worn leather satchel over her shoulder. Grace Thornton. She was older now, her face lined not by sorrow, but by years well lived. The breeze tugged at her coat as she scattered a handful of ashes into the wind. "Goodbye, Mama," she whispered. The ashes lifted and shimmered in the sunlight, carried out toward the horizon, to the place where ocean met sky, where letters once traveled and promises waited. Beside her on the ground lay a single object, a photograph. It was old, corners frayed, a younger Anna standing beside a man in uniform, the shadow of a horse behind them. Jack Thornton. Grace bent down, touching the image gently. "You found her again," she murmured. And for a moment she could almost hear them laughing, not ghosts, but memories made whole. Later that afternoon, Grace sat at a cafe overlooking the harbor. The same sea that once separated everything now connected it all. America, Germany, the past, the present. She opened Anna's final letter, the one she'd found tucked beneath the photograph box. "My dearest Grace, if you are reading this, it means my story has come to its quiet end. But yours still runs ahead, full of light. I spent so long believing love had been lost to war, but now I know it never was. It lived in you. Do not mourn the years we missed. The world tried to erase us, but it could not. What we built, and even in silence, have survived. When you see the sea, think of me. It was the only thing wide enough to hold what we felt." Mama Grace folded the letter carefully, her tears falling onto the page, leaving small, perfect circles, as if the sea itself had answered. Outside, a small child ran past the window chasing a red balloon. For a fleeting second, Grace thought she saw herself, barefoot in the fields, laughing under the Texas sun. Time, she realized, didn't move in straight lines. It circled back, sometimes cruel, sometimes kind, but always carrying pieces of what came before. She smiled faintly, whispering to the empty chair across from her, "They'd have liked you to see this, Daddy." That evening, she walked along the beach one last time before flying home. The tide was low, the air cool and clear. She stopped where the sand met the surf and looked out toward the horizon, where the last light of day melted into blue. There, in the distance, a fishing boat passed, small against the vastness of the sea. Its lantern flickered once, twice, like a heartbeat. Grace closed her eyes and listened to the waves. In that sound, she could still hear the echoes of everything that had been: Anna's laughter, Jack's soft humming, the child's first cry in the snow. It wasn't memory anymore. It was presence, she whispered. "We made it." Years later, a historian restoring wartime archives in Bremen came across a sealed box labeled Keller. Inside were faded photographs, handwritten letters, and a diary bound with red ribbon. On the first page was written, "If anyone finds this, know that love can survive what nations cannot. I was a prisoner, a mother, and a believer that kindness is stronger than fear." The historian paused, touched, then smiled. "She lived," he said quietly. And in that moment, Anna Keller's story, once buried under orders, files, and silence, breathed again. The final image, black and white. The Texas horizon. A wide field at dusk. A man and a woman standing apart, hands almost touching. Between them, a small child running through the tall grass, her laughter frozen in midair. As the wind moves through the field, color slowly seeps back into the frame. Gold, blue, green. Life returning where war once stood. A voice speaks softly. In every war, there are losses history cannot count. Moments of kindness, acts of love, lives that defied the rules. This was one of them. The image fades. Only the sound of the wind remains. Then, silence. A single line appears on the screen. "For the love that survived the war." War ends on paper, but not always in people. Long after the treaties are signed and the parades fade, there remain stories like Anna's, quiet, inconvenient truths that no one taught in classrooms. A German prisoner, an American cowboy, a child born between two enemies who refused to stay enemies. They didn't shape history with power or politics. They changed it by surviving it. In a time when the world was divided by fear, they proved that compassion could still cross every border. That love, even under watchtowers and orders, could still find a way to breathe. Their story was buried under reports and silence for decades, but it survived. In letters, in memories, in a single photograph that said everything words could not. If this story moved you, and share it. Because for every name history forgot, there was a voice, a heartbeat, a kindness that never made it into the records, and sometimes, the smallest stories are the ones that make us human again. You've been watching another untold story from the Second World War, where ordinary people lived extraordinary truths. If you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, like, subscribe, and follow to keep their memories alive. Because the past doesn't end, it echoes. And maybe by remembering them, we make sure love never loses to war again.